My name is Robert Moore. I'm a 30-year-old working for a major food company. I've been working at the company for 8 years since I graduated from college. I work in the planning and sales department, but I'm just an average employee, not particularly outstanding, nor particularly lacking. Currently, I'm stationed at the company's headquarters, hoping to avoid a demotion and keep working as it is. I have a wife who I met during my college days, a classmate of mine. Her name is Grace. We got to know each other better because we were in the same economics seminar at the same university, and we got married right after graduating college. Grace didn't get a job after graduating because we got married, and she became a full-time housewife. We had expected to have a child right away after getting married, but there was no sign of it happening, even after several years. We both wanted a child quickly, but since we were still in our 20s, we hadn't seriously considered any fertility treatments. Grace has always been a good student, always more committed to her studies than me, and I secretly admired her for that. Unable to have a child after getting married, Grace seemed to have started studying for a professional certification. Perhaps she had time on her hands because she was a full-time housewife at home without children. And recently, Grace told me she had passed the Certified Public Tax Accountant exam. Robert, I've passed the CPDA exam. Well done, Grace, I'm proud of you. I congratulated Grace with a smile, but there was a possibility that my face may have been a bit tight. I'm just an ordinary white-collar worker without any position. Grace is a certified professional with a promising future. And with her planning to work as a CPDA, I began to worry about what would happen with our plans for a child. If Grace were to make good use of her qualification, earn more than me, excel socially, and have and raise a child, where would I stand? I felt anxious, thinking that I might not be needed anymore. As Grace was filled with enthusiasm after acquiring her certification, my feelings began to darken day by day. And our relationship with Grace became increasingly strained. Grace seemed not to understand why I was becoming distant. Robert, have you been feeling unwell recently? Grace often asked me with a puzzled look. But I couldn't bring myself to admit my feelings of inferiority to Grace, and I just resented my pathetic self. I began to come home late and spent more days drinking with my colleagues after work. Conversations with Grace at home became less frequent. I still loved Grace, but my petty male pride was undoubtedly straining our relationship. Grace seemed to be considering working as a CPDA since she had acquired the certification. And I broached the topic of divorce with Grace. Our conversations had ceased, and our relationship had become uncomfortable, so Grace agreed to the divorce quite easily. Perhaps Grace also felt guilty about not being able to have a child, or so I thought. The day before I divorced Grace, I went to my favorite diner alone and cried in secret. As I traced back our days together, remembering Grace, whom I first met in college, I wasn't sure if getting a divorce was the right thing. Robert, let me do it for you. From our college days, Grace had always taken care of me with a cheerful smile. Whether it was taking notes for me at school or helping me with homework, it seems that I had always been dependent on Grace. But there was a part of me that couldn't face such a pitiful self. Grace probably didn't come to dislike me, but the flow of events was unstoppable. We put an end to our married life and each started our own lives. After the divorce, Grace and I stopped contacting each other. I, who had parted ways with Grace, was supposed to throw myself into my work with a fresh mindset. However, since no one was home when I returned, my passion for work seemed to have further waned. I felt like I had lost my reason to work hard, and I just kind of went on with my work day after day. It's not that I hated my job, but I didn't find it particularly rewarding, and naturally, my performance didn't improve. Then, I was transferred from the planning and sales department to the accounting department. I had no experience in accounting, and I didn't understand why I was suddenly transferred to the accounting department. But thinking that it's better than being demoted, I ended up working in the accounting department. Dealing with finances meant that it was a pretty nerve-wracking job. What's more, my boss in the accounting department was the president's son, a man named Jacob. Jacob was highly motivated and famously strict. Having graduated from a university abroad, and with plenty of experience in major companies, he also boasted qualifications as both a certified public accountant and a certified public tax accountant in a foreign country. With such a profile, the president's son was rumored to be the next president. It was reassuring for the company to have such talent, but unfortunately, he was quite harsh to other employees as well. "Robert, what is this document? Generally, you are too slow to complete paperwork and your analysis is too superficial." I'm sorry. I just transferred and it's been quite challenging." Don't make excuses every time. Excuses are cheap. Our company is set to grow rapidly and no one will listen to excuses. "I'm sorry. I'll be more careful in the future." If you have time to apologize, you should study more about accounting. How will you work in a company without understanding even basic accounting? "Yes, I'll study more about accounting." I was sweating bullets being chastised by Jacob. I seriously felt like I was in deep trouble. I realized that I didn't have time to complain about not understanding accounting. "All right, it's a matter of pride now. I'll master accounting through and through." I felt a fiery passion in my heart for the first time in a long while. Maybe I was influenced by Jacob's zeal, but his words seemed to guide me in understanding that I couldn't go on as I was. I went to a bookstore and bought books on accounting, but just reading the text didn't help me understand much. After doing some research, I felt that it might be best to attend an accounting school. I could make friends who are interested in accounting and exchange information. So, I quickly enrolled in a school that was relatively close to my home. Because of all the overtime Jacob had me doing during the week, I chose a school that offered weekend classes. "All right, I'll become a professional accountant here. I'll surprise Jacob." I opened the door to the accounting school with determination. Already, the room was filled with lots of students. Seeing this scene made me reminisce about my student days and my heart soared for the first time in a while. It made me nostalgically remember my youthful days. Looking back on my student days, my memories were filled with Grace. Come to think of it, Grace was always there by my side. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice that the class had started, and the school's tax consultant, the teacher, had come in. The moment I saw the teacher, I exclaimed in surprise. The tax consultant who was the teacher at this school was none other than Grace. Yes, Grace, my ex-wife. There was no mistake. She seems to have become younger and more lively. She must be finding fulfillment in her work as a tax consultant. Grace was passionately explaining accounting. Grace's explanation was very easy to understand, and even a beginner like me could grasp the structure and concept of accounting. The other students were also attentively listening to Grace's lesson, nodding their heads. As expected of Grace, she's doing a great job. I felt a sense of pride in Grace as if I were still her husband. Maybe she noticed my intense gaze, because Grace suddenly looked my way and our eyes met. Grace seemed surprised for a moment, but quickly regained her composure and concentrated on her lecture. After the lecture ended, I went outside the classroom. Then, Grace came running up to me to talk. "Robert, what on earth are you doing here?" Grace seemed genuinely surprised and stared at me with wide eyes. I asked her if she had time to talk at a nearby cafe. When Grace silently nodded, we decided to go to the cafe together. Doing this brings back memories of my college days with Grace. When we arrived at a cafe near the school, Grace began firing questions at me. "I was really surprised to see you in class, Robert. Why were you attending the lecture, and why haven't you contacted me until now? What on earth have you been doing?" After the divorce, Grace worked as a tax accountant, and she told me she also taught at a business school on weekends. I thought to myself that it was just like Grace, diligent and hard-working. She hadn't changed a bit since our student days. It seemed that Grace cared about me even after our divorce, but because I hadn't reached out at all, it was difficult for her to do so. I told her that I had been transferred to the accounting department at work, and that my new boss was a rather strict person who didn't compromise. Because of this, I had to study accounting hard, even on weekends, and that's why I started attending the business school. "I had no idea that you were teaching at this accounting school, Grace." When I said this with a laugh, Grace also laughed. "What a coincidence, but if that's the case, I can help you out." With her eyes sparkling, Grace told me that. From then on, whenever I went to the school on weekends, Grace gave me extra lessons. She answered all my questions, and thanks to the homework she came up with for me, I gradually gained a deep understanding of the subject. Whenever I had a problem with accounting at work, I would consult with Grace, and she would come up with several solutions for me. I started to digest her proposals and submit them to the company after analyzing them. I started spending hours debating with Grace every weekend. And before I knew it, Grace had once again become an indispensable person in my life. "Hey Grace, have you found someone else?" One day, I decided to voice the question that had been on my mind. I felt incredibly selfish asking Grace to get back together after I was the one who initiated the divorce, but I couldn't help but ask. Grace silently shook her head. I felt a profound sense of relief and couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you laughing? Do you think it's funny that I'm not popular?" Grace glared at me, seeming a little annoyed. "No, it's not that. I'm just relieved that you're still single. I've been reminiscing about our student days and wondering if we could spend time together again." At that, Grace's face turned bright red. It seemed that my words had made her a little shy. She was back to the face of the wife I knew, rather than the serious instructor. Since then, Grace and I started living together again. When I came home from work, Grace would listen to any work-related troubles I had. By that time, Grace had become a reliable partner and an irreplaceable presence in my life. Change was certainly happening at the company. Jacob was devising a new management strategy to further expand the company. I fully supported Jacob from an accounting perspective. Of course, this included a lot of Grace's ideas, but that was a secret within the company. Then, the management strategy Jacob built succeeded, greatly increasing the company's sales. Soon, my remarkable performance started to be talked about within the company. Jacob, my passionate boss and rumored to be the next CEO, was impressed with my work and asked what happened. "I found a really good accounting school," I replied, blushing a little at Jacob's praise. "I knew you had it in you, Robert. You've been studying hard. I want you to continue working hard in this company as my right-hand man." I was truly happy to hear this from Jacob, the highly respected and enthusiastic boss. To my surprise, I was promoted to a higher position. At that time, I remarried Grace. Although it was a marriage to the same woman, it might not be correct to call it a remarriage, but well, that's beside the point. I've been promoted, but I'm going to resign from the company. Jacob was very surprised by my words and tried to stop me. But I wanted to be with Grace. So, I studied hard to become a tax accountant, and, in fact, I managed to get my certification. Thanks to Grace, I had come to find accounting interesting. Moreover, Grace, as it happens, was joyfully pregnant. Now, I'm going to open a CPA firm as the principal accountant along with Grace. The most important person that I once let go due to my foolish pride, Grace. The second chance that I've been given, I vow not to waste it, and never to part from Grace again.